in our headlines on this Thursday, June 18th, here in South Korea. Speaking on the final day of the expanded Group of Seven summit in France, President Lee Jae-myung calls for dialogue to address economic imbalances rather than finger-pointing. Meanwhile, Donald Trump signs the U.S.'s Memorandum of Understanding with Iran on Wednesday during dinner at the Palace of Versailles with his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron. And the U.S. Federal Reserve holds its interest rate steady at 3.5 to 3.75% amid indications of potential hikes in the future, prompting a plunge on Wall Street. We start here in South Korea, where President Lee Jae-myung has returned home from his 10-day four-nation Europe tour that came to a close in France at this year's G7 summit, during which he joined his global partners to address economic imbalances, sustainable growth and artificial intelligence. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yoo-jin covers the final day of the expanded G7 talks.
The final day of this year's G7 summit began with the working session on reviving a balanced, shared, and sustainable economic growth for all. Speaking at Wednesday's session, President Lee Jae-myung said global economic imbalances should be tackled through dialogue and solidarity rather than blame. He also called for a stronger cooperation to strengthen the resilience of global energy supply chains as the war in the Middle East has fueled concerns over oil supplies and inflation.
President Lee proposed that energy importing countries, particularly those in the Asia-Pacific region, move beyond responding individually and strengthen practical cooperation through information sharing, early warning systems, emergency coordination, and efforts to stabilize oil and petroleum product supply chains.
The session was followed by a working lunch where world leaders and tech giants discussed artificial intelligence. President Lee emphasized the importance of narrowing the global AI divide while ensuring AI remains safe, transparent, and accountable. Korea endorsed 7 of the 8 documents adopted during the 2-day meeting of the G7 members and 5 invited countries. Leading up to the G7, attention was on whether President Lee would hold a bilateral meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump on the sidelines. Although no official summit took place, the Blue House said on Wednesday that the two leaders exchanged views on the Korea-U.S. alliance and the Korean Peninsula over Tuesday's gala dinner.
President Trump reaffirmed his strong commitment to playing whatever role is necessary to advance peace on the Korean Peninsula and said he would remain in close communication with President Lee on the matter.
Posting a photo of himself with Trump on X, Lee wrote that the two had a candid 90-minute discussion that produced meaningful progress. He added that President Trump had invited him and First Lady Kim Hae-kyung to play golf. After returning to Korea on Thursday, President Lee is expected to shift his focus back to domestic affairs. On Friday, he will chair a meeting with his top aides to review the country's summer emergency preparedness. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, as we await Friday's face-to-face signing ceremony of the U.S.-Iran Memorandum of Understanding in Switzerland, U.S. President Donald Trump reportedly inked his name on the MOU on Wednesday during dinner at the Palace of Versailles with his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron. His digital signature follows that by U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance back on Sunday. Our Oh Seong covers this latest event as well as the details of the MOU.
The United States and Iran appear to have inched closer to implementing their ceasefire agreement after both sides remotely signed a memorandum of understanding aimed at ending the conflict and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. According to US officials cited by Axios, President Donald Trump signed the document on Wednesday, days ahead of a planned in-person ceremony in Switzerland. Earlier on Wednesday, the Trump administration released a full text of the 14-point memorandum agreed by Washington and Tehran, declaring an immediate and permanent end to military operations, including in Lebanon. The US will begin lifting its maritime blockade immediately, while Iran will work to restore the free movement of commercial vessels through the critical Strait of Hormuz and return shipping levels to normal. Iran will remove mines and coordinate with Gulf states on the future management of the waterway. The two sides also agreed to a 60-day negotiating period aimed at reaching a broader agreement on Iran's nuclear program. Tehran also reaffirmed that it will not develop nuclear weapons, while both sides agreed to negotiate the future of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile under the oversight of the International Atomic Energy Agency. In return, Washington is offering significant economic incentives, including sanctions relief, waivers for Iranian oil exports, and a proposed reconstruction and development package worth at least $300 billion. Speaking in France after the agreement was unveiled, Trump made clear that any economic benefits would depend on Iranian compliance. He warned that if Tehran fails to honour the agreement or refuses to reach a final nuclear settlement, Washington could resume military action.
And it's a memorandum of understanding. If it doesn't get done in 60 days, that's all right. We go back to bombing. I don't want to do that because it's so good. But we might have to, because we're never going to let them have a nuclear weapon.
Trump said the deal also sidesteps a catastrophe for the global economy and renewed turmoil in energy markets. The focus now shifts to Switzerland, where US and Iranian negotiators are expected to begin talks on a comprehensive agreement covering Iran's nuclear program, sanctions relief, and regional security issues. Oh Seong, Arirang News.
The U.S. Federal Reserve hosted its first open market committee meeting under its newly appointed chairman, Kevin Warshback, on Wednesday, and announced intentions to hold its interest rates steady amid indications of potential hikes in the future. Our Ising-jae covers this latest decision and its impact on U.S. financial markets.
The U.S. Federal Reserve on Wednesday left its benchmark interest rate unchanged at 3.5 to 3.75%, marking its fourth consecutive meeting without a rate move and its first policy decision under new chair Kevin Warsh. The Federal Open Market Committee unanimously voted to keep rates steady as policymakers assessed the economic impact of the ongoing U.S.-Israeli war against Iran and a recent surge in inflation.
As you saw a few moments ago, the committee decided to maintain the target range for the Fed funds rate at 3.5% to 3.75% in support of the Fed's dual mandate. Economic activity is expanding at a solid pace, despite elevated uncertainty that owes in part to the conflict in the Middle East.
While the Fed held rates steady for now, its latest projections signaled a more hawkish outlook. The median forecast indicates that the federal funds rate will end the year at 3.8%, higher than the 3.4% projected in March. In addition, 9 of the 19 Fed officials indicated they expect interest rates to be higher by the end of the year. Warsh did not submit a projection in the Fed's closely watched dot plot. Wall Street on Wednesday reacted negatively to the prospect of tighter monetary policy. U.S. stocks closed sharply lower, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average falling 0.97%. The S&P 500 dropped 1.21%, while the Nasdaq Composite lost 1.34%. Treasury yields moved higher as investors increased their bets on a rate hike later this year. The yield on the 2-year Treasury note jumped 17 basis points to 4.21%, while the benchmark 10-year yield rose to 4.499%. The stronger rate outlook also boosted the U.S. dollar. The dollar index, which tracks the greenback against 6 major currencies, climbed 0.9% to 100.45. The Fed's latest decision suggests policymakers remain cautious about inflation risks, while markets are increasingly preparing for the possibility of higher borrowing costs in the months ahead. Ising-jae, Arirang News.
Here in South Korea, news of the U.S. Federal Reserve's latest rate decision is being met with caution by authorities here as they pledge a proactive stance to protect national interests. Our Lee Ju-yeon explains.
The government is stepping up risk monitoring after the U.S. Federal Reserve signaled further policy tightening. At a meeting of top economic and financial policymakers on Thursday, chaired by Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and Economy Koo Yoon-chul, officials present promise to strengthen an integrated risk management framework and take preemptive measures when necessary.
As expectations of interest rate hikes in major economies and global uncertainties, including the outlook for the AI-driven economy, continue to persist, we will maintain heightened vigilance, closely monitor market conditions, and take timely stabilization measures when necessary.
Meanwhile, Bank of Korea Senior Deputy Governor Yoo Sang-dae shared a similar view at a market conditions review meeting, urging caution over potential volatility in financial and foreign exchange markets amid persistent global uncertainties. He said a shift in the monetary policy stance of major economies is becoming increasingly apparent as central banks continue to prioritize inflation risk. Central banks worldwide are shifting toward tighter monetary policy as inflation pressure persists. The European Central Bank has raised its key interest rate to 2.25% as inflation remains above target, partly driven by continued geopolitical risk from the war in Iran. The Bank of Japan also tightened policy, lifting its benchmark rate to 1%, the highest level since 1995.
The reason why central banks are increasing the rates globally is because of the high pressure of inflation coming from the oil crisis caused by the Iran war.
Earlier on Wednesday, the U.S. Federal Reserve left its benchmark interest rate unchanged at a range of 3.5% to 3.75%, marking its fourth consecutive meeting without a rate move and the first policy decision under new chair Kevin Walsh. The Federal Reserve's latest signal has also heightened focus on the Bank of Korea's next policy move. Bank of Korea Governor Shin Hyun-song said on Wednesday that consumer inflation is expected to remain elevated for a considerable period, despite the recent decline in global oil prices. He also emphasized that the central bank will respond decisively until it is confident that inflation is on a sustainable path toward its target. Lee Ju-yeon, Arirang News.
Well, despite those concerns, South Korea's benchmark KOSPI made history on this Thursday by soaring above the 9,000 mark for the first time. The rally comes amid a host of factors, including chip makers, individual investors, and even geopolitics. Our business correspondent Park Jun-han reports.
Korea's benchmark KOSPI has rewritten history. On Thursday, the KOSPI surged past 9,000 milestone, logging a jump of more than 115% in 2026 alone. With Korea's growing role in the global tech industry and rising optimism across the sector, it took only 22 trading days for the index to climb from 8,000 to 9,000. The undisputed heavyweights are the Korean semiconductor giants. Especially, SK hynix has seen its shares skyrocket, surging over 300% this year. Adding to the momentum, SK hynix on the same day announced that it has already supplied samples of its next-generation 12-layer HBM4E chips to major clients.
Recently, expectations surrounding SK hynix have strengthened amid reports of a potential ADR listing and discussions over a share buyback and retirement program worth up to 100 trillion won. As a result, the company's stock has significantly outperformed. In addition, the prevailing view in the market is that the semiconductor industry will remain in a strong upcycle through this year and next, further supporting investor confidence.
Behind the KOSPI's rally, retail investors have been a major driving force. On the macroeconomic front, the easing of geopolitical tensions has played a crucial role. In particular, the recent report of an end-of-war draft MOU between the United States and Iran. With the expected reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, crude prices have cooled to the $70 range, effectively easing inflation fears. While global investment banks are already eyeing the 10,000-point milestone, experts urge a degree of caution.
The KOSPI's rapid rise in a short period of time has raised concerns over heightened market volatility. Even minor negative developments could trigger sharp shifts in trading flows, amplifying market swings as investors rush to either buy or sell.
With heightened optimism surrounding Korean markets, the KOSPI's 10,000-point milestone is now emerging as the market's next destination. However, volatility stemming from global uncertainties, interest rate concerns, and shifting investor sentiment remains a key risk that could challenge those expectations. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
In other news now, despite the plunge in global oil prices in response to reports of the US-Iran Memorandum of Understanding, prices at the pumps here in South Korea remain high. Our Kim Jun-ong files this report from the ground.
Optimism over a U.S.-Iran ceasefire has seen a drop in global oil prices, but gasoline prices in Korea remain stubbornly high. Despite the ceasefire agreement being only an interim one, global oil prices fell immediately. By Wednesday, both Brent and WTI crude dropped below $80 a barrel for the first time in more than 3 months. Yet lower gasoline prices are still some time away for drivers in Korea. At this gas station in Seoul, known for offering relatively low prices, gasoline still costs more than 2,000 won, or approximately $1.32 per liter. Korea's nationwide average gasoline price was around 1,600 won per liter before the Middle East war, but began climbing after the conflict broke out. Since mid-April, prices have remained above the 2,000 won range. The government has kept a price cap on gasoline for more than 3 months as part of efforts to ease the burden on households. Even so, drivers continue to feel the strain of high fuel prices.
Gasoline prices are just too high. I drive long distances for work, so fuel costs have become a major burden. I spend nearly twice as much on gas as I used to.
I never imagined diesel prices would climb this close to 2,000 won a liter. It reminds me of past economic crises.
Lower global oil prices don't reach drivers overnight. It typically takes 2 to 3 weeks for crude to be shipped, refined, and distributed, while much of the fuel now being sold was bought at higher prices. Experts say crude would likely need to fall back to around $70 a barrel before drivers see lower prices at the pump. With energy and logistics supply chains still taking time to normalize, the government says it remains focused on keeping inflation in check. Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chol convened a task force meeting on consumer prices on Thursday, pledging continued efforts to ease inflationary pressure.
Raw material costs continue to weigh on prices, and uncertainty remains high. We will do everything we can to protect household budgets and stabilize consumer prices.
The government also laid out additional support, including subsidies for fuel costs and expanded discount programs to help ease the cost of living. Kim Jun-ho, Arirang News.
The Trump administration's nominee for ambassador to South Korea, Michelle Steele, has been confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Born in Seoul in 1955, Steele immigrated to the U.S. with her family in 1975 and built a political career in California that paved the path to her Republican membership of the House of Representatives from 2021 until last year. Once she arrives here in Seoul, Steele will become the second Korean American to serve as U.S. ambassador to South Korea after Sung Kim. The U.S. Congress is seeking to allow American allies to build non-combat U.S. Navy vessels. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung tells us why and how.
The U.S. Congress is pushing a bill that would allow U.S. allies to build non-combat U.S. Navy vessels in their own countries. The Senate Armed Services Committee has reportedly included a provision in the recently approved National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2027 that would permit up to 2 bulk fuel tankers or strategic transport ships to be procured from foreign shipyards. This is expected to permit the overseas construction of non-combat vessels, but the construction would need to align with U.S. national security interests, and the contracting companies would need to make corresponding investments in the U.S. shipbuilding and maritime sectors. The House Appropriations Committee's Defense Subcommittee has also drafted a similar version of the fiscal year 2027 Defense Appropriations Bill. Scheduled for a committee review next week, the draft would narrow the scope of the ban on using funds for foreign shipbuilding from all Navy vessels to combat ships only. Although these legislative proposals are limited to allied countries and non-combat vessels, one expert says this itself gives a legal pathway for the Moscow project to be realized.
South Korea is effectively the only U.S. ally with the shipbuilding capacity to build these vessels at scale. Creating a legal pathway for construction in Korea makes the Moscow project far more feasible.
Meanwhile, the Senate Armed Services Committee voiced support for ROK-US cooperation on nuclear submarine construction and ordered the Pentagon to hand in a report that assesses its implications for Indo-Pacific security until February next year. The expert added that this shows how stalled talks are now making progress.
Recent vice minister-level talks reaffirmed both sides' commitment to advancing bilateral security cooperation. And this shows how the recent talks paved the way for more substantive discussions on a nuclear-powered submarine project and a possible revision of the nuclear agreement.
Still, it is unclear how the committee will approach sensitive issues like nuclear fuel supply after the Pentagon review. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, movie theatres saw a sharp surge in audience numbers during the first half of this year. According to the Korea Film Council, box office admissions hit over 53 million between January and June 16th, up over 25% on year. Findings also show those in their 20s accounting for a tangible portion of the audience for K-movies such as Colony. Earlier in the week, we told you about South Korea hosting a culture expo in France this week as part of celebrations to mark the 140th anniversary of their diplomatic ties. Well, culture correspondent Park Gun-woo was at the event for an actual gauge of the public response there.
To get a bowl of Korean ramen and tteokbokki, you need to join a long queue in France. At least that's the case this week at K-Expo, being held as Korea and France celebrate 140 years of diplomatic ties.
One of the fastest ways to understand a culture is through its food. And here at the K-Expo, people just don't see Korea, they taste it. From instant tteokbokki, spicy ramen, to seafood specialties from Korea's coastlines, this food zone is bringing Korean flavors straight to Paris.
We can experience really, I think, the whole culture. I feel like there's more and more exhibitions and fair about Korea, mostly in Paris, but maybe it should be not only in Paris.
Demand was so high that some food booths ran out of products hours before closing time. At the beauty zone, visitors lined up to try Korean skincare products and receive personalized consultations.
If I wake up tomorrow and my skin feels good, I will try to find the product or a similar one. There's a lot of shop in Paris, so it's really easy to find the K-beauty products here.
The energy continued in the evening with the K-pop concert featuring 6 acts, including Monsta X and NCT Wish, drawing thousands of fans. A2 Major also held a mini fan meeting, giving fans a chance to meet the group up close.
I tried my chance to go to the fan site, but sadly I wasn't selected. So I just came here to see them because even though I wasn't chosen since I really like them a lot. I just seeing them is already a lot for me.
For organizers, the event is about creating stronger cultural ties between the two countries.
I hope this serves as an opportunity for young people in France to gain a deeper understanding of Korean culture beyond what they've seen so far. As the government and private sector continue to expand exchanges, I believe that by the time we celebrate the 150th anniversary, Korea and France will feel less like distant countries and more like close neighbours.
The cultural exchange is also generating business opportunities. Organizers have set a business consultation target of $400 million, connecting Korean companies with European buyers and turning cultural interest into economic opportunity. Business meetings continue through Friday as Korea looks to further expand the global reach of K-culture into business partnerships. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News, Paris.
Showers are easing in most areas, but may continue into the evening in eastern Jeollado and inland Gyeongsang-do provinces. Summer-like heat will remain in place tomorrow, while rain and scattered showers are expected in various parts of the country. From the afternoon into the evening, brief but intense showers are likely to develop across parts of western and central areas. Including Seoul, most areas will see around 5 to 30 millimeters of rain. As the heat continues to build day by day, heatwave alerts are being expanded across more areas. As of 2 p.m. today, heatwave advisories have been extended to parts of Seoul. This marks Seoul's first heat advisory of the year, arriving 12 days earlier than last year. Tomorrow morning will also feel somewhat muggy, with temperatures remaining above 20 degrees Celsius in most areas. Seoul will start the day at around 22 degrees, Daejeon at 21 degrees, Busan at 21 degrees as well. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 32 degrees, Daegu at 31 degrees, Jeju at 26 degrees. Looking ahead, rain is expected across most of the country on Saturday, bringing relief from the intense heat.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session. Thank you for watching.